Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA Foundation conversation with Better Call Saul star Rhea Seehorn. I'm Dan Fienberg from The Hollywood Reporter. Before we begin, a reminder that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID relief fund, and you can get more information on that in the comments section below. And now, to discuss all things Kim Wexler, here's Rhea Seehorn. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thanks for doing the Better Call Saul week. Very exciting.
So after the finale, I asked Peter Gould about this. We've spent 5 years kind of waiting nervously for Jimmy to go full Saul Goodman. Is what happened to Kim in the finale, did she go full Saul first, do you think, to some degree?
It's an interesting question, and I have no knowledge of what season 6 will bring. So how that cliffhanger unfurls itself, I'm not really sure. I'm not positive. I do think what's a very interesting question to me, and it was in talking to Peter Gould and Ariel Levine, they co-wrote it and then Peter directed it, was talking about this idea of are we uncovering something that was always there in this person, or is this what this person has been driven to become? And I won't give away the whole conversation that we had, because really the answer is part of one of the most beautiful and complex elements of the show, I think, is that questioning of who are we innately versus innately, and who were you born to be someone, how much of every single interaction you've ever had and the relationships you develop and the strife and the obstacles you go through, like how much is it shaping you? I mean, the answer is a lot. But I think that multiple characters in this series, probably all of the characters like Kim, are facing that, are asking the audience to face that very large question of who we are intrinsically versus extrinsically, and what masks we're all wearing. She, in fact, has been wearing a mask that we've seen for a long time. The way she presents herself at work is extremely, there's a uniform to it, there's an armor to it. Her sort of vice grip on not having anybody be able to read her emotions and her thoughts unless she chooses, and her very specific way of choosing to not speak in certain situations has always, to me, told of another side, of some other interior side to someone. If not their past, then their present. So that's a roundabout way to say, like, I'm not sure what her full Saul Goodman is, or if we're looking at someone that was imploding quietly inside all along versus this is who she wanted to be.
Well, the moment with the finger guns that Kim does it's a callback to the end of the 4th season. And I was really curious watching it, how aware do you think Kim is that that's a callback? Like, she is very clearly echoing him for us, but does it feel like she knows in her head that she's kind of throwing that thing back at him that he did?
That is a really interesting question, because Peter and I discussed in that scene, there is an element going on of messing with him. And it's been throughout all of the seasons, and they remind you of it very sharply in the preceding scene with Patrick Fabian playing Hamlin, and her explosiveness about that. She's really... and it happens with the Kevin Wachtel scene. She does not appreciate being told how to feel about something, and who she is as a person, what she's capable of, what she can handle. And so in that final scene, Jimmy is asking those things, and there's definitely, I don't think they would ever play with the audience so much that none of what she's saying has any gravitas to it, or would have any, story that's going to come out of it. But I do think she's messing with him on purpose, and there is menace in that as well. So I chose to have her be a little more aware of the shoes on the other foot, as far as you keep forcing it down my throat that I don't know all the sides of you. Well, guess what? You don't know all the sides of me. I chose to have that a little more coming up her esophagus than her specifically recalling the gesture. And I think for me, it was because I wanted to make sure I didn't do an exact imitation that could lend itself to comedic. Instead, it's this very weird, blurry line there where she's weirdly being cute and menacing at the same time.
Well, it's totally a gesture that could be either playful, flirtatious banter between a husband and wife, or it could be almost her mocking him of, come on, sort of maligning his masculinity almost to a certain point.
But that's the thing is, even if it was subconsciously mimicking him, it shows you the weight that moment has carried, how weighty that moment has been with her this entire season, that she keeps having this image in her head. So I liked it being a little more indirect, although it's there. She's definitely throwing it back in his face.
And the conversation with Patrick Fabian's character, you sort of sense at the moment that what he says is so very the wrong thing to say to Kim. Do you think Kim realizes in the moment how pissed off she is at him, or is it something that sort of gets in her head and becomes kind of the bee in her bonnet or whatever?
I let it take her by surprise. And the beginning of that scene, walking away from him from the elevator, it's not unlike the scene with Jimmy where they almost break up and instead she proposes to him. The tops of those scenes and confronting Lalo often have these this bridge to get there where Kim tries to just walk away, just be like, I'm not going to have this argument because I'm not feeling completely in control of myself right now. And that to me was different than when we started season 1, episode 1, is that she's a little less in control of not having this thing come out that's in her. And as we were talking about with the other scene, we don't know, is this other side of her something that's always been there, or something that has just been the bile and the fire just stewing and stirring for the last 2 seasons or whatever. But in that one, I chose to play most of those moments this year as though she couldn't suppress any longer. It just comes out. And it made that moment of laughing in his face a lot more fun to me. And it's also a lot more, it keeps it dangerous when, instead of knowing like, you know what, I'm going to give it to you. I've always wanted to give it to you. I'm going to give it to you right now. And then laughing in his face, like as a mocking gesture. I think it's much more dangerous and off-putting. And Patrick Fabian plays that moment so well, to have someone think they're in control and then laugh in such a weirdly explosive way. So I liked it. I liked her danger being that a little less planned.
Well, one of the things about the past few seasons is that we've been constantly feeling kind of sad about Kim, and we've been worried about Kim, and there's always been the kind of semi-reactive nature to what's been happening with her. And I feel like in this past season, she became much more the architect of whatever the heck was happening to her, and it was maybe less poor Kim and Kim's about to kind of explode or something. Was it satisfying to get to be much more in control of where the character was going than sort of being reactive?
You know, I have had a lot of fun with the fact that, first of all, I should say, and this is not just lip service, the fact that fans embraced my character, who's not from Breaking Bad and totally new to this world, so with such respect and love and sensitivity and caring about the fact that they're so concerned about what happens to her and sad about anything happening to her, it's not lost on me how lovely that is. I've enjoyed that, and I enjoy talking to the fans about the character, and she's very three-dimensional to them, which brings me great joy. That being said, what was really fun for me is I didn't see this season coming per se. I always did. Just as the scripts are written, and they're written this way in Breaking Bad as well, these are characters who make incremental steps in the wrong direction or over cliffs. They didn't mean to just go for full force. And sometimes it is because they always dreamed of going down that path. And other times it's just circumstances, and now you found yourself here. You cheated on your taxes once 10 years ago, and now suddenly, you know, you're whatever, like wanted for murder. So it is those kinds of questions that I think we raise about the character. I personally, to answer your question, I personally think she has always been the architect of what was going on in her life. You don't save me, I save me, all the way back. She couldn't always force the outcome she wanted, like at HHM and that kind of stuff. But I never saw her as a victim of her circumstances. I never saw her as being with Jimmy because there was no other choice. She's perfectly fine alone. That's pretty obvious. She's a loner, more so than he is. And it was a lot of fun this season to see them incorporate into the character that she does not like, that people are seeing, that they don't see her as making her own choices. And then to hear the fans' reactions when they watch it, of going from, like you said, wow, you know what, she's not sad and just reactionary. Like she's meant to do all of this stuff all the time. And that was a lot of fun for me, because I just think there's a lot of power in her moments where she is quiet or chooses not to engage with things. It is not a position of weakness, not ever. I think she is the architect of her life and always has been.
I just love that when we started off, it was kind of the question of, okay, will she be able to keep Jimmy from going full Saul? And this past season, it became, okay, well, you know, is there anyone we need to be protecting from Kim? And B, who does Kim have protecting her from going over in that direction?
Yeah, I feel like Kim. I feel like Kim is her best savior, and also her biggest danger is herself. Both sides, and even stuff that doesn't have to do with Jimmy and the relationship. Her insistence that she get to play God about who is deserving of justice and who isn't, and bringing that into the legal system. Her pushing the envelope constantly of if I can just get all the facts. I mean, even going up in Lalo's face. Now, granted, there were very few other options they had in that moment in the living room, but when she went to visit him in the cell, I thought to myself, she really thinks that if she can get all the information, and if Jimmy tells her everything he's doing, she's now got the ability to produce the outcome she wants and to get the result she wants. And I think that's a very large ego. It's a very large ego, which we have applauded as someone that like pulls herself up by her own bootstraps and won't take help from other people and drives herself to exhaustion and a car wreck just to say, I can do it. I can do whatever I say I can do. And pushing herself. I mean, the moment with Schweikart, Dennis Boutsikaris, that I just love to play off, when he is willing to give her an out to say, like, look, between you and I know something fishy is going on with how you're playing both sides of Mesa Verde, and Saul just happens to be representing the other side. Recuse yourself, and we'll just move on. Just give it to you. You've got people that can handle it. Like, let's just do that. She should have taken that moment. And when I was sitting there, my buddy Phil Palmer, our brilliant award-winning sound mixer, he was trying so hard to not have a facial gesture, because he's, doesn't want to mess me up while I'm performing. But as soon as we were finished the scene, he was like, every time she had the moment where she's sitting at the desk and you're like, please don't get up and say anything. Just accept that you got busted and move on. And she gets up and screams in his face, like, tell me right now what I did. Like, are you calling me a liar and all this? And I'm like, you are a liar. You did do everything he's saying. But she cannot stand being accused of it. She cannot stand being told she is somehow one of the bad guys now. And I find that obsession dangerous, very dangerous. So I don't know. She has the ability to save herself, but she seems to have the ability to burn herself at the stake as well, like just dying on that hill over stuff.
Well, you mentioned that when Lalo arrives at their apartment, there's not that much she can do. But in the episode before, when she goes and confronts him in prison, that's her taking that herself. That's her being the active participant.
Yep.
Do you think as she goes there, she even knows what she's going to say, that she has any sense of the words that are going to come out of her mouth, or is she gung-ho all the way, ready to stand up?
That one I chose, yes, because I was thrilled. I didn't know that there would then be episode 9 where I get to confront him again and have a very different result. That being said, at the time when I was playing 8, and Vince was directing me in that beautiful Bagman episode that's like epic, and Gordon Smith, who wrote it, we did have a discussion about every other time you see Kim go into any work situation, no matter how much turmoil she's experiencing, often the audience is my only confidant, the only one who knows that she's off her game or is feeling unsettled or something weird just happened, but she covers everything the second she walks into a courtroom or any kind of legal proceedings or a business place. And I talked to them about the fact that it's like, does it feel like this is the day that something changed? The day that she couldn't keep it together anymore? We're talking about someone who definitely did not sleep all night, and probably went through every other option until she got to this one. Can you call the police? Not really. What are you going to tell them? What can you say? She's tried to call him. Clearly the cell phone has no service. And she believes truly that he is dying or about to be killed somewhere in the desert with no help, and no one else knows he's there except me. So I think she thinks, again, back to the ego, that she could be the one to fix this all on her own. And number 2 is there are no other options. And that I have always admired about her, is that she's not the person that tries to pass the buck. That's for sure. She will take on any task. And so I went to that thinking, unlike some of the other scenes we were talking about, and the polar opposite of the scene where she confronts him in the living room, which I think she's trying to make up as fast as she can before it comes out of her mouth. I think in the prison, it is extremely memorized and wrote, and she nervously went over it, smoking a pack of cigarettes and driving all the way there. And then I worked with Vince to get this idea. We did it a couple of times to try to figure out, like, well, how do we display that? And in the end, he gave me a note to add a little bit of an element of a 6th grader trying to do their book report that's very nervous about being there. So there's just a slight difference of my cadence and rhythm in it that is not it's not as powerful as the way she speaks normally with legal rhetoric and driving a point home. It's a little just I came here to say this, and I'm going to tell you this, and you're going to do this, and it's this and this and this and this, and now I need the answer I'm going to get, and I thought I was going to get an A on this, and I'm not getting an A. Okay. It was a lot of fun, and Tony Dalton is such a wonderful performer to play off of. And he had these little prison sandals on that are like kind of sad versions of sliders, I guess, that everyone wears now. And my legs are crossed under, and I was also very still, because in those moments, we've all been there when you're feeling extremely emotionally fragile and also physically depleted. You conserve everything you can to try to look pulled together. And so I was being very, very still, and Tony kept reaching his legs because he was like man spreading under the desk, and it kept going further and further and further, like with, Vienna sausage toes just coming out of their sandals towards me. It was driving me nuts, but he was doing it on purpose, and we had so much fun.
And then does it become one of those things where after she's seen that she can do it that once, it becomes easier the next time?
Well, she fails. That is a rarefied thing in the Kim Wexler world. Getting sent back down to doc review. Well, that's not true. She got in a car wreck trying to take another client, but but she rarely fails when it comes to her will and her intellect marrying about something she wants to get. I think it's an act of desperation, and I don't think she's used to being in that space. Even the telling him I'm his wife, and I know that legally she meant like, well, I can't testify, so you don't have to worry about that and all of that. But she's an extremely intelligent person and must know the risk of saying that. but I think she is desperate and scared. And I guess in the other scene when she confronts him, it isn't that this is going to be easier. It's that she needs to be extremely sure-footed this time. The second time she gets a chance to come at him, she needs to not appear vulnerable at all. He already shushes her early in the scene when she tries to speak. And I think Kim has a pretty good idea of what a guy like him thinks about women being hysterical and emotional. He would just swat her away like a fly. So I think she does have some memory of being in that prison and thinking, we need to be extremely centered and direct. And it gets heated, but and passionate, but she doesn't sound as vulnerable as she does in the first scene. And I think that was a choice. Huh. I made it a choice anyway.
Now, the engagement scene is a very particular scene because it's kind of the twist shock at the end of an episode. When you got the script for that episode, what was your reaction to that decision that she announces? Did you immediately kind of parse out what her motivations were, or did you have to ponder it a little bit?
My immediate reaction was, oh, Tom thinks I'm a better actor than I am. Because I was like, Bob and I read it pretty much at the same time, and we're looking at each other thinking, like, there's no transition there. There's no transition there. It's very, and yes, I had an idea of probably why she was, again, I didn't have the following script, but I had a pretty good idea of why she's doing this. And I ask questions, and the writers are never manipulative with us of like, I'm not going to tell you something that I know that would help you. It's just that they like to give us the space to play the present moment and to not think the step ahead all the time. So yeah, I just remember thinking like, wow, this is exactly what you're asking. Were you how far back did you plan on saying this? And when did it come out? And for me, there's no planning. It is a lightning fast transition that I think we have seen in her in other less conspicuous moments where Kim does not deal with messy emotions and equations that don't have a right and wrong answer. She does not like that. Jimmy is the much more emotional. It's a lot of fun. This gender stereotype, if you will, a flip flop. He's very emotional and wants to like really dig into your feelings and talk about them. And she's like, "Can you just tell me what the problem is so I can make a solution?" Like, she's very pragmatic. And so I think the emotion, I tried to craft the scene in a way, because the whole first part is her trying not to have an argument again. And we've all been there too, where you get home and like, you're like, if I see his face right now, I will punch him. I really hope he's at the grocery store, because I'm going to drink a glass of wine and go to bed, and maybe cooler heads will prevail tomorrow. But right now I will punch you. And instead he's there gloating and playing a guitar. And I think we blocked it. And I worked with Michael Morris saying like, I think she is avoiding him. Like, just, I can't even look at your face right now. I'm so betrayed. I'm so painfully upset and justifiably angry. To her, it's a very black and white issue. What went down. And she still thinks the debt hasn't been paid for what happened at the end of season 4 going into the beginning of season 5, which is, yes, you didn't plan on abandoning our plan when you were trying to get reinstated, but you played me. We were part of a con together, and you played me, even though you're saying you didn't know you did. But once he insists that she engage with this argument, and they have this argument, it gets so heated, and there is no answer that checks off all the boxes. There is a very rational answer, which is, you guys need to break up right now. But she loves him, and he loves her, and it's not as, to me, the moment doesn't feel as soft and romantic as like, well, love conquers all. It feels much more, I think there's something about the two of them and what they reflect in the other person that they need. And I think she's not herself really in front of anyone else. And I think she sees this relationship at this point as something that she needs, not like a desperate codependent partner. Well, there's some codependent issues going on there, let's face it, but it's strange. There's something about what he compliments her in her and what she compliments in him that she's not willing to let go of. And so I think it's a flipped switch of, I can't deal with the emotions, make it practical, marriage.
And then you guys had to do one of the most pragmatic, least romantic wedding scenes in history in the next episode. What was it like playing those beats and sort of trying to, yeah.
I loved it. And trying to what? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, just trying to remind us that this is a couple that we actually like seeing together, and yet this marriage that they're having is not one that we necessarily want to see happening in exactly this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Although it's like, how else would you imagine they'd get married? There's no way she's got a scrapbook of like the dresses she always wanted to wear as a kid. Like, so I don't think Kim gave a shit about ever getting married until this moment. Not once. In my head. I don't know. Then they'll show some flashback that'll prove me wrong, but whatever. That's what I think. And I had Melissa Bernstein, that was her directing debut. She is a formidable, creative, intelligent force from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul as an executive producer. And this was her directing debut, and we couldn't have been happier. She was wonderful to sort through those moments, because there's comedy going on too. There's a weird, dark comedy going through all of those opening sequences. And we approached it like two lawyers that had to go to court today. And they're going to make this contract that will make it possible for him to not have to keep me out of the loop. And I'll also be able to presumably tell, she hides things from him too. Like what she was doing with Schweikart and Coakley and messing around with Mesa Verde and all that. So I think she thinks like this contract is going to fix a lot of our problems, and then we'll just move forward from there. And it isn't till they have to say their vows and look at each other that there's just a little sentimental moment that was quite sweet. And we weren't even sure we could get away with that. And then Melissa assured us and Peter Gould assured us that, like, these characters have been with us and trying to forge this relationship for 5 seasons now. I think they can look gooey at each other for 10 seconds.
And the proposal episode also is the one that begins with that very, very brief Kim flashback. That's obviously not you in that scene, but it still is you as the character. When you see that piece of information, what does that kind of tell you that maybe you didn't know before about Kim? And how did that flashback align with the backstory that you'd made for that character?
It was extremely close. And I hesitate to say that because I don't want it to ever be conveyed that I'm like, I'm a genius. I knew what they were writing. It's not that. It's more that I thought from episode 1, when they share a cigarette and one sentence, couldn't you just, I can't. And she cleans up she straightens his kicked trash can and goes back upstairs. From that episode and then continuing all of season 1, because it's a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle and it's really fun. You don't have all the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and no one's telling you what the full image is, but you're still trying to assemble some sections. And it's really fun. And then you get 11 more pieces and you're like, do those all go on this section that I was already working on? Or is that actually part of this lake thing? And you're trying to figure it out. And so it's not like you're wrong if you made up a backstory that isn't something they give you, or right if you do. It's this confluence, I feel like, and it's been a really organic, interesting, fun experience to be given scenes where you're silent for long periods of time, and then you make this choice and this choice that seem at first erratic, but when you kick the tires a little bit, you're like, no, actually, yeah, I could see where that comes from. And you're constantly trying to figure out the logic and the math of this person's brain. And when I was doing that, it felt like I was like, oh, she was probably raised by an addict. Like, I don't know why, but very early on, it felt to me, this is someone who is very used to cleaning up someone else's mess, even if, and she's comfortable loving chaos while needing to have boundaries for herself. And she also knows on a deep level that she must be her own savior at all times. To rely on anyone else would be extremely dangerous, and tragic. So even if it weren't true specifically, I still would have, even if we never saw that flashback, I still think it would be a place to build Kim from that ended up being very authentic, because those things are true about her, regardless of the seed of the origin. But I loved watching Katie and Beth perform that scene. And as my mother and myself as a 12-year-old, the cello I didn't see coming, but I loved it. I was like, I'm a cello player. But then that makes sense too. I totally get it. And I love that Tom was asked how they picked cello, and he said he can't remember who picked it, but they did delight in picking an instrument that when you shoot a wide would make Kim look even tinier. She's just consumed by so many burdens. And I just love that idea of she's not angry at her mother as much as just resolved. Like, gonna take care of myself then. Here we go. And walking down the street. And I thought it was great. I asked Peter once if we would see flashbacks because I was curious about some things, and he gave a really interesting answer. He said they were very interested. They're always interested in what makes people tick and the backstories of people. And he said, but when you have an enigmatic character that is loved for being enigmatic, as she is, you have to be very careful about answering too many questions. And I thought that was really smart.
and saves you the trouble of worrying about having too many details back there, so you can just kind of keep things distinct.
But it leaves like our audience's ideas of who she is. It lets you put yourself in her shoes. I have a lot of male and female people that talk to me about things they see about themselves in her, qualities that they ascribe to, sitting in doc review, trying to get ahead and constantly being squashed down by the man. You know, like I like that she is both a mystery and completely accessible, sometimes in the same scene.
And just as a last question, I know I've asked you this question before. I know everyone has asked you this question before, but as you kind of look at the ending coming next season, has your version of what a happy ending for Kim would be shifted over the seasons from where we were in the first season?
Yeah, I mean, I find it harder to figure out what happy would be for her at this point. Not dead is certainly lovely. But there is a tragedy that's been unfolding with her that we can't really go back from anyway. And people used to look at it like Kim was such a saint, and the tragedy that was unfolding was because of the relationship with Jimmy. And now it sometimes looks to me like the relationship with Jimmy now I look at it and I'm like, wait, maybe the relationship with Jimmy is part of what helps her keep herself in check from fully going off a cliff. So yeah, my version of like what's a happy ending and how she where she goes from here, it has shifted. And my obsession with like how does this end for her has turned to just my obsession with like, how the hell are they going to tell this whole story of like, how do they wrap this whole thing up? I'm so excited to still be a cog in that very complex wheel.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for chatting, Rhea Seehorn.